would like to welcome you to Memories and thank you for coming. This Meadows Valley Memories is exploring the lifestyle and the stories of the cattlemen of this area. It's an extremely important past of this valley and of the economy of this area. Our panelists are all cattlemen and ranchers and cowboys that are willing to participate. We might be bringing the microphone around to some of you. Big thanks to our moderator, Dale Fisk, the historian and newspaper columnist extraordinaire from council. And thank yous also to our Memories Committee members who make this happen. Special thanks to Hazel Clay. She did a lot of work on this one this time. And also Jan Manning, our publicist. We thank those who provided refreshments and Pete Walker who films, edits, and prepares each session for sale to the public. So if we don't look good on film, it's Pete's fault, okay?
Good enough.
Okay.
Blame
Okay. Thank you again to Dale Fisk and this evening's panelists. Please welcome them.
Well, I guess the first thing we ought to do is have everybody introduce themselves that's up here, even if you think everybody knows you. Some of you guys I don't know or haven't met, but let's start over here with Larry. I'd like you to introduce yourself and tell the folks what you're doing now, if you're still in ranching or if you're doing something else or if you still live here in the valley or live someplace else. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I'm retired.
You still live here in Meadows Valley, okay?
Yeah, I live right in town.
Right in town? You got any cattle here in town? Okay. Go ahead, Ed.
Well, I'm still a rancher and I'm not retired, I'm just tired. But I came here at 47. Been here ever since.
Where's your place at?
South end of the valley.
The north end? South? Okay, Jared.
I've been here all my life, and well, you know, Ed Manning said he came here in 46, was it?
47.
47. You know, he's not even a long time ago. I came here in 33.
33, you better get your heels going.
So,
You came here pretty young, didn't you?
yeah.
All right, let's go over to this side. Go ahead, Dick.
Oh, I'm Dick Clay. Got a little ranch out here. I try to work, but you know, I'm getting lazy anymore. It's taking me a week to do a half a day's work.
Where's your place at?
I don't know, east side there.
Okay.
I'm Tim Farrell. I took over the Farrell Ranch about 14 years ago. I'm fourth generation. They came here in 1887. My family did. So that, add that all up, and it's 122 years of ranching here.
Who were your father and your grandfather?
Charles Farrell was my father, and Sylvester or Jake Farrell was my granddad. My great-granddad was Matthew Farrell.
So was Matthew the first one?
Yes.
So was your place out east of town here?
Yeah.
Is there a road named after the family out there, Farrell Lane or something? Okay. Okay, who's this next guy? I haven't met you.
Dean Dryden. We own and operate the Dryden Ranch. Also relatives of the Clays. My grandfather, Howard Dryden, came here in, I believe, 1912.
He married my grandmother, Minnie Bell Clay. And the Clays came in 18...
I don't remember. It's been too long ago. I
It
can't
was
remember.
late 1870s. Yeah, someplace in there.
One of the first
Yeah,
immigrants in the valley.
yeah.
So, Dick, how are you and Larry really?
Brother.
Brother, okay. Sometimes it pays not to know all the details, and you can ask a lot of questions. Okay, well, let's, Vic, go ahead.
My name is Victor Armacost. I actually came to the valley in 42 with my folks. My folks had worked here in the valley for the Circle C Ranch. In fact, they met on the Circle C Ranch and were married there. And I had lived with my folks in remote ranches owned by either Albert Campbell or the Circle C. So when I got to be 6 years old, they had to come to town, thought I probably needed some schooling, and so that was 42. And we moved into what is now the, what are they calling out there? Whitney Ranch. My dad used to own a lot of that, and he sold it to Wayne Whitney. We now live out north of town, and Charlotte and I have a little acreage that was actually once part of the old Circle C Ranch, and we pasture cattle. We started at 4 o'clock this morning.
I'm Charlotte Campbell Armacost. I'm married to Victor, and my grandmother was an Osborne, and I'm related to half the people here.
Dean wouldn't admit it was baby.
No, he wouldn't admit it. No, you didn't admit you were related to me, sir. Which is dangerous.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. So, and of course, the Campbells came in 1879, and my dad was Albert Campbell. My claim to fame, I guess, for being up here is that I follow him around when he irrigates. I don't have a horse, and I have an ATV, and that's about it. I'm not much of a cowgirl.
I saw you had a book,
Yes,
back there.
yes, I did. I have made a book of my heritage, which has lots of pictures in it of Circle C and Dad and all the ranching. They did that. I didn't do that. I lived in town. In fact, don't ask too many questions of these cousins up here because they won't paint a very good picture of me.
Is that a one-of-a-kind book, or is that reproduced?
I didn't publish it. I gave a few copies around. I did it for my family just because the ranching industry is disappearing and people don't have any appreciation of what people went through to preserve this valley. And they logged with horses and big teams and whatnot, and it's just, so I did it for my own personal, I've never really published it. But I mean, if somebody wants a copy, I don't care if they copy it, it's just not something I've got out myself.
Addition on this one.
I'm Kurt Rose, married to Gina Rose. And Gina and I got married in 1966, and Bob Ballback was running the ranch at that time. And anyway, Richard Ballback, Grandma Ballback, he left the Duncan place to the kids, to Lori and Ronnie and Danny, and the home place, the Union. So when Bob more or less got done running the ranch, I took it over. And I wasn't really a cowboy. I was more of a mechanic than I was a cowboy.
When was that you took over the?
Oh, I'm not sure, about
68.
About 68 probably, yeah. And anyway, we rented pasture and had a few, when we had 70 cows, I think, of our own. And just that's the way it went until when the boys got older, then they got, and I went back to my mechanic.
Oh, okay. So you took over the ball bat place?
Yeah.
Is it south?
Yeah, south here.
Yeah. Everybody here probably knows that.
Yeah.
Let's, I thought I'd ask you guys to each say something about, every rancher has horse stories, not horror stories, horse stories. Probably have those too, but I'd like to hear you talk a little bit about the differences in, did people use different types of horses when you guys were young? And maybe talk a little bit about work teams that you may have known, if you're old enough to work with horses and farming and implements and stuff like that. You old enough to remember when horses were used instead of tractors?
The only thing I can remember is when I was a kid, I got to lead the horse back and forth on the what do you call that? Derrick, yeah.
Oh, okay.
And that was my first experience with horses.
Was that a barn derrick or a
Yeah,
saddle?
barn derrick.
Yeah, like the old Jackson Fork type?
Yeah, Jackson Fork.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess with a horse you couldn't run out, drag it through the end of the barn like you can with a tractor. How about you, Larry? How do you think people have different kinds of horses now as far as, are they kind of bred up differently now? Or?
Oh, not that much, but when the ranch was in operation, we never started the horse until they were 6 years old.
Really?
And they were kind of set in the way too. But, no, and most of the, like I say, everybody had his own string of horses. He didn't bother anybody else what you rode. And I was about the youngest one in the family, and so they decided that they'd teach me how to ride. Any horse they didn't ride, well, I got. Either I learned to ride or that was,
Did each person that had his own horses, did he pretty much break his own horses as most times? Or were there guys that went around breaking horses kind of as a living or part-time or anything?
well, yeah, Vic's dad, brother, why, in the wintertime, why they'd get some of them in and break them, so it'd get slick out in the trail, so they'd get them in the barn. They'd saddle them up and open the door and out they went. If they're lucky, well, they would, if they didn't, well, the fellow picked them up.
Do you think methods of training and breaking horses are different nowadays than they were back then? Maybe a little more sophisticated than just getting on them and making them stop bucking?
Well, yeah, for like I say, why they didn't start hard together is 6 years or so old. Now, why you start when he's 3 years old.
How about you, Ed? You got any horse stories or what horses were like way back when?
Well, we used to irrigate on horses. When we first came up here, we started irrigating on them Japanese quarter horses. We fed cattle up there. We had some teams we fed with. We had one team old mules, big old mules, weighed 1,700. You'd go out and you had to catch Jimmy first, then you could catch Becky. Catch Becky only until you caught Jimmy.
Did you say 1,700 pounds?
1,700. They were the biggest mules to make that exercise. They were, and they would back up just like a team of horses. I know my brother, he got pretty mad at me because I traded for him, traded the Angus bull for him. We really didn't need them, but I always liked the mules. I traded for the mules.
Were they already broke? Pretty well
Yeah,
trained?
they was all broke. Yeah.
Did they ever pull anything? Were they better disposition than horses? Did they
Oh, I
different to work with?
Yeah, they're different. They're different, quite a bit different. good old team though, it's hard to beat a good team of horses. We had some very good horses, work horses. Like we used to feed here in the winter time.
Darrell, you should remember some horses that were around here, or
Yes.
do you think horses are different nowadays?
Well, nobody has any work horses anymore. We did, my first job, putting up hay, and was putting on a rake on a single horse. That's where I started. And as I got older, we did all of our hay with horses. No tractors back then.
Have a little 6-foot horse-drawn mower,
5 foot.
5 foot.
No, 5 foot more. Yeah, that's very interesting. The mowing machine is hard on their necks. And I didn't weigh very much. My uncle put a big chunk of iron on the seat. So balance my weight so the horse's necks would be so.
What was it that made their necks?
The weight of the tongue.
Oh,
So the mowing machine was a lot of weight on the tongue.
and the driver's weight kind of balanced that?
Yeah, the seat set back over the back of the mowing machine. So that would counterbalance your weight. I remember that. And as I got older, then we always fed the horses in the winter. And, well, by the time I was got out of high school, I was still putting up hay with horses, but we probably only had one tractor, I believe, for mowing. And then in the wintertime, it took 4 head of horses to the sled. And I was very proud of my work horses. They just did it all. They go to the same stall, harness on, go they could hook them up to the sled. And I'd always load up the day before. And if you didn't park the sled on some poles, it would freeze down. I'd always keep that so it wouldn't. But if you didn't, then the lead team has to break it away. Just a little bit. And with a real big sled, that was, we borrowed Warren Osmond's big little sled, a 10 by 20. And that, when the lead team had to break it loose. And once it got to rolling and dragging, that big sled just moved so easy. It pulled real easy.
How many horses did you use to pull it?
4.
4. 10 wide and 20 feet long.
Yeah.
It's a big sled.
This is all recently back then.
Yeah.
And I'm feeding the cattle, I break the feed yard. Just wrap your reins up around the staff around the front. They'll go where they're told, they'll follow.
Would they respond to verbal commands if they wanted them to stop or something?
Well, just to stop. I didn't know that G and Hoss stuff, but they didn't need it. But they go around and follow it, break a new feet and follow it. Anyways, that's very interesting work.
Were the teams that you used, were they workhorse size or were they just kind of riding horse size?
No, they were around a ton, couple of them.
Wow.
They were big. They were, and you know, it's, this was one thing. One winter, I bought some hay from Boston. It's across the road from the house. I had 5 stacks over there, and when I come down straight towards the house, and it was all snow. and when the snow left, it was down to gravel. And I would have to assist the league team because they wanted to cheat a little bit. But they had to do their share too, and they had to go like this. And then they get right straight down the road. And a picture of them horses, I had my wife at the time take a picture, and it was all four of them, and it was all down to scratch. And it was pulling 2 loads of hay and gravel. And then to pull into the driveway there, the league team wants to cheat a little too, that way. And, you know, I really appreciate that. So that's all my work experience. I've had some good saddle horses too. This one I had to cheat.
You had to what?
I had to cheat. I didn't ride like in the rodeo. You know, one hand waving at the crowd.
You mean you had to cheat when you was bucking?
Yes. I have a rein in each hand, and I tried to jerk him off stride, so if he wouldn't, and if I could find a bar pit or a pile of rocks, I'd put him over in that. And then he quit. So that's what you call cheating. I'm not the big.
Not my bush.
Yeah. It wasn't for show. It just to get along.
Well, I remember one time, Daryl, out in the middle of the field, you put on a pretty good show for us. You stayed with it too.
Yeah, that was the horse I was talking about.
Yeah. Did you get us, what was his name?
Tucson.
Tucson, right, yeah.
Boy, he was tough.
Yeah, I thought, you know, that Daryl Kent's a pretty good rider.
How often would he do that, Bill?
Oh, whenever I relaxed. If I rode that horse all day long, I couldn't. And that's tiresome. It really is. Just to be on the edge. And you get, if you're eating up on the mountain, you get back, you're wore out. There's a lot of places on the mountain you couldn't break it and do that. Yeah, I remember that.
I don't remember. It was a pretty good show, that's why I remember.
Well, he must have been a pretty good horse, otherwise he wouldn't have kept him. Just-
Well, you know, he bucked me off once. And it was my own damn fault. That's when we had the capture gun, the doctor listening on, you know what they are. Well, you can dock the cattle with the capture gun, it holds 16 cc's of antibiotic, so one shot of them hit him in the hip.
A pistol?
Well, it was a rifle, it was a single shot, 32 gauge rifle. And I was over across the river towards Sims there, and I knew there was one doctor. And I was, we didn't ride well, it was hot. And I was packing this gun, and I had it loaded. And I just reached down the scabbard and pulled it up like that, and I just played it over his ears, and man, I was gone.
You didn't even
I didn't even have a chance to pull the trigger.
Had you shot on before you knew what was
No, I hadn't. I was tired of everything. I have done it, of course, to fire that off. Yeah, he got me once, Bert.
Well, let's move over here to Dick. Got any horse stories?
Well, very few. You know, I do remember though, when we first, I was a kid, pretty much a kid. And we started out with a Derrick and a Jackson Ford. And then we went into the beaver sides, I believe they call it. And that was quite an improvement on putting on hay.
Now, when you say Jackson Forks, you mean on the stack or in the barn?
On stack.
Yeah.
We had one, well, the big barn out there now, you still got a rail down the middle of it where we pulled it up.
On the Jackson Forks, did you use those, I forget what they call them, just kind of a pole derrick?
Yeah.
I mean,
And
and
for one here, and one over there, you know, and then your
coon
room up there.
So the horse basically just pulled the fork up and down, and they had to swing it over by hand with a rope or something and dump it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So was that your first experience with horses, with driving the dairy horse?
Well, no, my first experience was, I'll tell you, I was about, not really my first, but I was 5 years old, and Mother and I went to town. Somebody took us to town one day, come home. She saddled the old mare up that I always rode. I rode over to my Aunt Minnie's, and I was there for a little bit, and I heard it sound like Mother hollering. So I went out, climbed on the horse, started home, and the house was fire. Don't even take a two-story house.
How old were you at the time?
5.
How'd you get on the horse?
Well, I could crawl. Started crawling up.
Must have had a pretty tame horse.
Oh, she was a wonderful mare.
So what do you remember about, did you work with teams of horses, farming and stuff like that?
Not really a great lot. I'm going to tell my nasty story here. I was working for Albert Campbell over halfway, and we had a sledge, and so he was, I don't know how come he went with us that one day, but I drove the team up. We had to haul hay about 2 miles back down to the cattle, and he was behind me. He had a team and I had a team. I was riding to load the hay, or a sled though. It was a sled in the wintertime.
How many horses on each sled?
Just 2. Yeah. We started down the country there. He's a hollering at me, and now you're going to run off and get stuck. Dang it, he did good. I kept right on going.
How did you get out?
Well, I finally had to stop and unhook my team and go back and help him pull it.
Well, was he stuck in snow or mud?
So,
No.
yeah, it was snow. It was just, you stayed right on them tracks, by golly, you slid off, and you did get stuck. It wasn't too hard to do.
What kind of horses for teams do you remember? Were they pretty big work horses?
Just about mediums. And they really wasn't heavy horses. They were just good work horses. I don't remember I'd say there was probably 1,400 pounds somewhere. Not real big.
The reason I asked the question is because in a lot of the old pictures from like 1900 and that era, you see horses in the pictures that aren't big work horses at all. And they look like regular riding horses on Fresnos and pulling stages and stuff like that out in the field with wagons. And they don't look like work horses at all.
No, a lot of them were really big horses. You could see the Belgians and stuff like that. Ours wasn't that heavy horses. They were pretty active, though. I'll say that they could get down and do some pretty good pulling.
Were there any horses that any of you guys know of that were used for both riding and in a team?
They didn't have any, but a lot of people did.
Did they?
Our horses were too big to ride.
Yeah. So if they rode them too, they were probably more of a smaller than a great big workhorse.
Well, most of them were,
Maybe if people couldn't afford a lot of horses, they had to use them for more than one thing.
They used them for everything.
Yeah. So what do you think, Dick? Do you think horses are different nowadays than they were back then as far as riding horses? Or?
All together, as like Larry said, we didn't break a horse when he was young. Now they start breaking. They baby him. That's all I can say about it. They don't do it like we used to. When you went out to get on a horse, you was ready for a ride, whether you jumped one or not. You was ready for one.
So they probably hadn't even been handled much before that.
Not a great lot. They never had any grain until they got working hard, you know, riding really whether he was riding them and then we got him. Before that, like, they were just, oh, gosh.
Dick Clay was one of the best bronc riders you could ever see. Great bronc rider.
I have a memory. I'm a little bit younger than Dick, and as a young girl, we were riding, I guess we were riding for the Circus of Idaho, but I remember we came up to some trees, and Dick decided to go after the steers or cows or whatever it was, and he took off for these trees, and of course, I'm a coward, so I was staying back, and he was riding on top of his horse, and suddenly he was on the side of his horse, then he was going full blast, and then he was on the top of his horse, and turned the cow.
You're trying to
But
duck
was
under-
I impressed? Was I impressed? Because he just off to the
Took it under
side.
the tree?
Just missed branches, and then he was back on top of his horse. And by the way, there are some really nice pictures of workhorses in that booklet that I made. There's one of Rock and Nugget, huge workhorses at the ranch have, Circus City. Beautiful horses.
Any other stories off the top of your head?
No,
How about you, Tim? You remember your dad or your granddad talking about horses and some of the things that happened with them that would be interesting?
I'm old enough, I've got some actual memories of it.
Yeah.
But I am guilty of the generation that phased horses kind of out on the Farrell Ranch.
Use the Japanese one.
Yeah, yeah. But when I was a child, we had some workhorses, Babe and Polly, and a lot of good memories of going out in the winter, 10 below zero, feeding the cows. I can still hear the feet squeaking in the snow, the hooves.
How big were the sleds you were using for that?
Oh, I don't know, just standard wagon size.
Not like
sled.
you now.
It was a, yeah. Yeah. But,
Did you have to worry about the horse starting in the morning, I guess?
no, he didn't have the loud noise, you know, out in the field. So it was a different time, that's for sure.
Did you guys use it for anything else, feeding in the winter? Did you use it for any farming or anything like that?
Not from my memory, no. No. We had quarter horses, ranch horses to handle the cattle. Probably up until I was about 10 or so. And we've always had horses. Well, we haven't always had horses around there. I've got horses around there now. They're mostly to look at, but my daughter rides them some. But I would make the comment that to me, horses have changed in the sense that when I was a kid, I had a bomb-proof horse that was a ranch horse that had many hard hours on her, and you just can't come across a horse like that nowadays. Most ranchers aren't using horses like they used to. There still are some. It's harder to find a good broke bomb-proof horse. That's one thing I've noticed.
How about you? Do you have some horse stories or ancestor horse stories?
Yeah, I got that too. But of course, by the time I was a kid, they had a ranch on the Little Salmon River, and they wanted to feed them up here, so they phased out of the work horses. But we had saddle horses, and my dad was a pretty damn good hand with the horse. And he's a pretty good carpenter, horrible mechanic. But, and my granddad was good too. And my granddad bought and sold horses probably to everybody around here.
Your granddad was a jockey.
Yeah, my granddad was a jockey, and he rode horses and and sold them for polo ponies. Yeah.
Where was he a jockey at?
They had a circuit in this area,
Yeah.
and they did that more than they had rodeos in his time.
I know they had a racetrack right at Meadows.
Yep.
For a while.
Yeah, and they did everywhere. Every town had a racetrack.
Yeah.
And they did that more than rodeos in his time. Rodeos were not as popular, they just weren't, that was work.
What was your grandfather's name?
Howard? Yeah,
I thought that was your dad. Who was your dad?
Bill.
Bill.
Yeah, and, but no, yeah, Lappin' Cat. That's what they called it. They didn't have gates, they Lappin' Cat. And he was quick. He's a little guy.
Yeah.
Well, I don't remember him as a little guy, but he's a little guy. But yeah, they broke a lot of horses and bought and sold and traded horses. That was part of what he did. Saddle horses, polo horses, that kind of stuff. And then they had I remember stories about their work horses and stuff, but I wasn't, that'd be secondhand. But they had big horses. And he logged also with horses. Yeah.
Right around here.
Yeah. And I've got pictures someplace with him and his half-brother on a bunk of logs, and they were huge. But they didn't know, of course.
You talking about your grandfather?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they hauled the long logs to sawmills right in town here.
There's a picture over there of a team pulling a sled full of logs on Circus City. And they were, I don't know how they got down there.
Yeah, they did it by hand with the horses. But, yeah, and as far as my experiences with horses, I broke colts, and that's something that you had to do around my dad. And I'm like Tim, when we were riding them, irrigating on them every day, and I rode on Salmon River all the time, and when I was 8 years old, I was on hillsides steeper than a cow's face. And those were good horses, and they were bomb-proof. But they had a lot of hours on them.
On those steep hills down there, do you use dogs a lot?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I still do. I still use dog, but down there, yeah, I can remember those trails being so steep down in that country that you'd be pushing cows around those trails down there, and a lot of times your horse had to pivot if you had to turn, because they couldn't just turn around. They had to pivot on the back.
Which way would you make a pivot, uphill or down?
It didn't matter.
Really?
Didn't matter. Whatever way you had to brake. But, yeah, and you had good dogs too.
You ever have cattle fall down or roll down a hill or anything like that?
Had a horse go with me.
It's got to be scary.
Yeah. I had a horse, I had a good horse of mine. I was probably 8, 9 years old, and a hired guy was riding me and had a trail slip out from under the gateway. And that horse went down through a fence, probably, 50, 75 yards away, and darn near killed my horse because he ran fence post up through his sheath and up through his, but Doc Rowan saved him.
What happened to the guy?
Oh, he's all right. No, John Barn was tough.
I assume he got separated from the horse before he went down.
No, heck no, he rode him down. No, but yeah, I got some pretty good saddle horse stories on Salmon River. That country's rugged. It was always nice to get up here because you could go full tilt with your horse. You didn't have to worry about it, bog once in a while or something. But down there, you made too many mistakes, and you or the horse were in trouble. Yeah, the saddle horses for me, I don't have any experience with it, really. Yeah. And now I use a four-wheeler or something like that. It's a little faster.
You have to feed him
Yeah.
all the time. How about you, Vic? We've got memories of horses or horses.
You know, I am sort of the age between Dean and Daryl when they were still using horses for haying when I don't know, I was 10 or probably 12 years old. And I drove horses a little bit, but never out feeding and working them hard like Daryl and Dick and these guys. Actually, I drove horses for Tim's dad and granddad haying a couple of years. We had a buck rake, and I just had one horse on that, and then they had what they called overshots that used to stack hay with, and I drove a team of horses pulling that cable and putting that overshot over. And every once in a while I'd go a little too fast and knock Tim's dad off the stack and piss him off. but
I do throw the hay too hard.
yeah, the faster you went, when you hit there, the hay would go faster. And you did it in bents. I don't know, maybe those bents were 20 feet or so. I've kind of forgotten how wide they were. So, but I didn't drive teams a lot. I was just when the tractors were coming in. I think maybe my dad had one of the first tractors kind of in this country, a John Deere Model B, and so my experience with work horses, with riding horses, I got a picture over there of a little mare that my dad bought for me that I rode a lot. She was on the little level, pulled back, you couldn't tie her up, and every spring she bucked me off. I don't know, she's just a little bitty thing. I knew she was going to buck, but every spring she bucked me off. But boy, she was tough, talk about being down on the hills. Where Dean was, I was down there one day with his granddad, probably the worst day of my life. But riding her down there.
Did he cuss you?
Yeah.
Me too.
As far as teams and as far as what you're asking about horses changing, I really think they've changed a lot. Like Tim said, it used to be, for your kids, you'd go out and get a used horse that the Cowboys had used up on the hills, and 12, 14 years old, and you can't find those anymore. And it seems to me like, particularly quarter horses have got a lot more fine bone. They're quicker, and they're just really, I don't think, as well built for the kind of riding that Dean talked about as the horses used to.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. Those horses usually weren't a tall horse. They were an old style quarter horse, shorter back, and broad, yeah, but stump horse.
So I have one story I told
Don't do it.
1,000 times. Like I said in the introduction, my dad worked for the ranch. To me, the ranch in my home was a Circle C ranch. That was the ranch. And we were out on a ranch called the Maynard Place, which is across the Salmon River from where the Steelhead Inn is, for those of you that drive north. And so the only way you could get there was row a boat across Salmon River. But I had a horse called Old Pal that I rode with my dad out there on those hills in the wintertime. And he was old, and he was like we were talking about, a horse that had been used, but he got around good because you kind of wanted to have a fairly decent horse for your kid up there on the hills. And one day, Charlotte's dad came over, and here I am, I'm across the river, nothing to do, little boy by myself. His dad came over and took that horse for Charlotte.
And the reason I got it was because I was standing around yelling and screaming and saying, why can't I have a horse, why can't I have a horse? And my mother said, Albert, go get her a horse. And that was the best horse he could think of. But that's where that's where Vic and I began, was fighting over that horse.
How old were you guys at that time?
I was 6.
I was either 4 or 5, and we were there a couple of years.
How'd you get the horses across the river?
You know, I don't know, well, I think they trail them back around, with horseback, you could get down into a bridge down the river there, but with a car or anything, the only thing the only way you could get across the river other than the horseback was rowing a boat across there. Or in the wintertime, sometimes it froze up. One winter there, it froze up and they took a lot of hay across there with pickups and things.
There's a picture in the book of them going across the river.
On the Salmon River?
The main center.
It's not got that cold down here.
They put hay on it.
That was the winter.
Yeah, they put
About 30 days.
hay and gunny sacks down and let it freeze, and then the ice would build up, and then they would haul things across the river. But there's a picture of Lloyd Campbell and some of the old timers taking hay across the river when it was.
Those
frozen.
guys had swim horses too.
Oh, yeah.
And it didn't seem to faze them much.
But the other thing too that we have is we have some of the horseshoes that they used when they were down there on the Salmon River, and they had these great big, either about that wide and a big, about that like that sticking up. And I have one shoe that has, one side is up, the other side is like this, like it would be to catch them if they were going to go down. And then they had little points sometimes on the shoes. And I remember my dad coming home in Christmas time and talking about riding down there on those hills and telling about how, well, we lost a cow or two, and they slipped and they went and drove into the river, and we lost him. He was on a horse. But those men that rode those hills and those days on horses were pretty tough men. And they did have good horses, but they never would have come home.
It's called court shoe.
Yep, it is a great. But one of them is flat rather than, but it's got turned, it's turned on both sides.
Last horses we had down there that we put horseshoes on, they were carbide. Because they could well carbide on them then.
Last one.
Yeah, well, and you had to be careful with the horses that had cork shoes on, because if they got around other horses and kicked them,
Yes,
that just tore up the other horses.
I can add Dean's story on horseshoes. Every fall or spring, I can't really remember what time of the year it was, but Bill would bring out a bunch of horseshoes for me to build the corks up on. And I think I was using boron.
Was that what it was?
Yeah.
You're using electric welder or what?
Yeah.
Where?
Yeah. Some of them he had one with sharp, and others,
Oh, he had them sharp.
Yeah.
You take them horseshoes and one side will be straight and the other side will be crossways. And then you take
You talking about the heel of the shoe?
the toe, and you sharpen the toe through.
Put on the heel, one
One
feet
way,
one way and then the other.
Yeah.
one of those shoes, that's what I'm talking about.
You were talking about your dad talking about the cows sliding off the mountains. Yeah, that was,
Oh, it was awful. He
It
came
was
home
horrible.
at Christmas but he never slipped. He never fell.
You don't tell your mother.
Oh, well, that's true. That's true. I probably didn't know.
There's something I'd like to add to the using horses to work with Oscar Brandstetter. I think he used horses right up to the day he retired, and
When was that?
well, I'm not sure.
50 years ago.
Do you remember when Oscar retired? I can't remember the year. I helped him out there, feeding and stuff. And the tractors would pull the hay wagon, on the hillside. Horses could, the tractors wouldn't. They'd spin out, and slide around and stuff. And I always, Oscar would just tie the reins up on them, and he and all, and we'd throw the bales off,
Where was his place in?
Well, it was out here on the east side of the valley, kind of straight across from Sims. I don't know if his anybody's got any stories about Oscar and his workhorses or not, but he took a lot of pride in his workhorses. They were pretty big.
I have a story about Oscar. When we first came up here, I had my little nugget horse, and I had some fancy shoes put on with bar across because he was having trouble with his hooves. And I had the best horseshoer in Walla Walla do this and paid a lot of money to have it done, and boy, was I proud of the shoes on my horse. So Oscar stopped and he talked to me a little bit, and he said, what kind of shoes you got on that horse? And I showed him, and he said, they won't last very long. Oh, you know, 2 weeks, I stepped in some mud, off the shoes. He really didn't know horses.
Do we have a new panel member?
Well, I'm up here under totally false pretenses
No.
because I'm not a rancher and I did not grow up on a ranch. My dad always wanted to have a ranch, and so the only reason I came up here was to put on the record that, you know, there's a continuity as far as land is concerned.
Well, introduce yourself.
My name is Mickey Ross Eby. My dad's name was Bill Ross, Bill and Benita Ross, were my parents. And they did not, he worked as a lawyer, or as a logger for J.I. Morgan, from the 50s on. And then when I was in high school in 1962, they bought the first piece, 80 acres of a ranch that was called the Ted Johnson Ranch, which is out in the southwest corner of the valley. And then he bought the next piece to the north of that was, and I actually don't know who owned it to begin with, but we call it the Halley Dryer Field. So obviously it was the Dryers. You guys probably are related to those people. And then the next piece they bought.
Upside down.
Yeah. And that's the funny thing. How even at that time, I remember it as being a kid, growing up in what was called Company Town, is what we call it. But there was the people that lived across the highway. They were a whole different group. And then there was the ranchers, and they were a whole different group. Or even as small as this valley was, we all kind of we're in our own things. But the next piece that my dad bought was the Buchholz place. So, and I'm sure some of you people are related to the Buchholzes as well. So there was the Buchholzes and the Cars, and I don't know who owned the Cars place was out here on this side of town, but then Tommy bought this piece in the back, and I don't know who owned that piece before Tommy bought it. Does anybody? Collinses? Is that who it was? Yeah. Okay. So I grew up not on a ranch. I so respect all of these people and the weather that they've been through. I now have land, but I am what I call a blue sky farmer because that's what I look for, kind of like pilots. If it's blue sky, I'll go out. But if it's not, maybe I'll do something else. But when you guys talked about polo, one of the guys in town, when I was in high school, my dad, I rode horses when I was in high school. But one of the guys in town, Nolan.
Yeah, help us all.
Well, there used to be horse races in Cascade, the 4th of July. And what they did on that track is, because people from Boise Valley were coming up and with their racehorses, and then the rest of us folks here, you know, we just were running our regular cattle horses around. Well, what they did is you'd have to go so far in one direction and then turn around to go around the rest of the track. Well, that immediately eliminated all the race courses out of that, so then we could have a legitimate local race. Well, Mitt told me one time when I was over there, he said, now this is what I want you to do. I want you to keep your eye on that flag. Don't listen for the him to say start. Watch the tip of that flag, and the minute it goes down, that's when you go. So it was interesting growing up and listening. Earl Lindbergh was one of the old cowboys that he was those guys were so patient with us kids horsing around. But that's the only reason I came up here is to get some of this stuff on. Plus, I think, and I don't know if it is historically documented, I'm sure it is someplace, but since we're talking about the Cowboys, that at one time, The Circle C Ranch was the largest family-owned ranch in Idaho and second only to the King Ranch in Texas in size. And I think that's kind of important for people to realize that that's kind of the size of operations that we had around here at that time. And then later, a guy from California came up, which of course never became one of the locals because he was an import. But I think he's the one that started and talked about putting signs outside of town where it was the home of 10,000 steers, the summer home of 10,000 steers or something like that. And people didn't realize the volume of steers that were in there either. And they don't, I'm curious to know how many of these guys brought their cattle in through town to ship them from the railroad and from the stockyards over here.
Everybody did.
Everybody. I remember in high school going through Marshall LaFay's yard and uproar that would always cause.
Every time.
But anyway, go ahead. I just wanted to get those things kind of documented.
Wait a minute, what were we talking about, the yard with cattle cut across the
Oh,
yard?
yeah, they bring them through town
Yeah.
because the stockyards were over here on the other side. And now that was had to been in the 50s. when that
40s.
happened.
40s.
Yeah, that they would bring them through that side of town and try to keep them on the road, but obviously they're not going to. So.
It was later than that, Mickey, that
Was
was,
it?
we lived on that road. And it was, I found out, because I was a little upset when the Cowboys drove through my yard one day.
Yeah.
It's an official road for driving cattle, I found out. That last street between the Meadows and goes from the highway over to the stop.
Well, it's a shame.
You know,
I'm
surprised-
Is that a
I'm
street now?
surprised
Does it
that
have a
you
name?
guys are telling them.
I don't know. I think they finally changed it, but when I looked into it, they had all the rights in the world to drive their cattle and run their horses down that road.
Now, I don't remember it real well. I do remember it, but not real well. But guys, forget to tell them, what were the age of the steers that were shipped out of here?
3-year-old. Well, it's back to 2-year-old.
Yeah, they were 2 and 3-year-olds, so.
Yeah, they were long, short, long, 2 and 3.
What was the last year that they shipped? Didn't they have the double deckers? And I helped on that one.
That was the last train that went out of the Meadows.
Yeah. Probably one of the biggest cowboy thrills I ever had was that day. All that cabin. There's another story that goes along with it.
Campbell brothers.
Yeah.
The double deckers, that was.
Yeah. I don't know what happened, but after shipping was all over with Oscar and I really don't remember what happened, but anyways, somebody took our horses. And of course, we came back about 1, 2 o'clock in the morning to get them. And somebody had loaded our horses up and taken them home, put the saddles where they belong, had the horses in the corral. Oscar's the same way. I mean, to this day, I don't have done that. We might have done it ourselves, I don't know.
We have to take a break because Pete's got to change tapes in his machine here. So let's take about 10, 15 minutes more. All right, we're going to get started again here. I'm going to ask everybody to, all our panelists, and Anita Brandstetter is joining us. So you have any horse stories that you want to finish off? Okay, go ahead.
Well, you probably won't believe this, but in my younger days, I did some horse haying. In fact, I was pretty good at running the old horse mower. I could cut square corners, which I was pretty proud of. And couldn't harness the horse, I wasn't big enough. Because I weighed about 80 pounds, but and I had to stand up on it to run the, whatever it was.
How'd you cut a square corner with a mower?
Well, you just put on in one brake or something and you
Just pivot?
yeah, just pivot and it makes a perfectly square corner. And Charlie and I, used horses to do our haying for several years. And when we were down in one of the lower fields in the hot weather, you know, when you get all hot and dusty, we'd stop off at the cattle ditch and take a swim on our way home. We rode the horses back home, the work horses. And
Where was your place at where you were raised?
I was raised here. I was after I was married.
Oh, yeah. And where was that place at?
Up on the, well, it's right north of the, or right east of the 45th parallel out there. In fact, I still own a bunch of ground out there. But we finally got a tractor, and then we stacked hay with, what's that thing? It sort of looked like a buck rake, only it was on the front of a tractor, and you lifted it up and then dumped it, and I had to run that while Charlie stacked.
Is that loose hay?
Yeah, and anyway, one day I was getting a little bored and I wasn't paying much attention, and all of a sudden I heard Charlie holler, and I looked around and I had that thing right up over the top of me. I was ready to trip over backwards, but anyway, then we finally got a tractor mower, and so Charlie opened the field for me, and then I was supposed to go out and mow that while he was at work. And anyway, I thought I broke the mower. I got hung up and backed up or something, and of course it broke away. And I was so upset with the brand new mower, but, you know, it wasn't broke. All you had to do was back up and put it back in place. But I had some real experiences there. Then you were talking about Oscar's horses. He absolutely loved his work horses. And in fact, that was a fault of his. I think by the time he ended up having, I don't know, 20, 25 horses, they were work horses. And I don't know, I guess he finally started cutting them down. But anyway, one year, at least, 1 year, I know I've seen pictures of him, he had a built covered wagon or something, and went to the council on 4th of July, and done that in his horses in the big parade or something down there. He really liked his horses, but he wanted to know when he retired. Actually, when he retired he was on the back of his wagon. He had the tractor going, and then he was feeding off of it, I guess. And anyway, there wasn't anybody driving the tractor, it was just going. And anyway, he had a stroke and fell off the back of the wagon, or sled, whatever it was. It must have been a wagon. And it was pretty severely, damaged in his stroke. Anyway, that was when he retired, wasn't it?
I was going to ask you all to talk a little bit about the transition from horse farming to tractors, and what you remember about that, and when did that happen? Just any of you that have memories of that. About
50s.
early 50s?
When anybody got enough money to buy a tractor.
Right.
60s for some of us.
Yeah. So I don't suppose everybody would change over at once, but yeah. I think it started in the early 50s.
That's my recollection. Like I said, I think Dad had one of the first tractors here. It was a John Deere, one of those that had putt-putt.
Yeah, single cylinder.
John Deere Model B, and that happened in the late 40s, early 50s when this transition from horses to machinery, and I think maybe, I would guess maybe baling hay probably brought the end of horses as much as anything.
Did the first tractors that you remember around here, did they have rubber tires, or did they have any steel wheel tires? Tractors? They're all rubber tires?
It seemed like to me that I was told that the steam engines, at least one of them down at Council, was in this valley up here on these ranches.
Well,
Is that right? There was a steam, Bill Anderson had a steam engine. And it was, you know,
Did they ever use them up here for anything other than threshing machines, running threshers?
yeah. Threshing.
yeah, threshing
That's
machine.
about all we use them for. You mentioned balers, and that's one thing I think is kind of interesting. I suppose the first balers had wire instead of string.
Yeah, the first balers that I remember were, what were those boys that came out of Midvale up here?
Sides.
Yeah, they were the first ones that I know of that had
Sides and crowns.
balers up here. And then after a couple of years, why more people up here went into them. And the first balers that my dad had were wire tie balers.
Were there some of the early ones where somebody had to sit back on the baler and trip it every bale? Or?
I don't think that lasted very long. I remember seeing some with those seats on them, but the sides balers that I remember up here did not have that, and the balers that my dad had, they didn't have that. It was automatic tie back there without having two people back there running it.
You guys got baler stories? Or?
Oh, yes. I've always been stacking loose hay with beaver slide. And other neighbors was getting balers. Well, I just thought I had to keep up with it. It was completely wrong. I didn't have to haul on hay anyplace, right to the ranch, pitch it off. But anyway, I bought the string for the season. It cost me $512, and that's exactly what it cost me to pay my hay crew the year before. Good thing.
So a lot easier to pitch in the winter though.
Yeah.
What do you guys remember about the change as far as how many people in the valley in the old days had cow-calf operations compared to now? Has it kind of changed more to grazing and
Yes.
people coming in from the outside, where before in the old days it was a more cow-calf type? How did that happen? When did that start to change?
When the cow man here moved to the lower country. You know, it used to be long winters here. And so my husband went down south and Circle C went down north. And so it wasn't too many winters.
Was that a cabin type situation?
Fine.
Yeah.
Oscar, he capped here, and Little Ross capped, and then what county we have, we capped.
But when they would move to a lower elevation, was it mostly for calving, or was it just general?
I don't know, I think it was maybe.
About 2 months less winter.
Yeah.
To feed, get the spring rest. And it was warmer. You didn't have to feed as heavy.
Did they start the cattle down lower and then bring them up in here after later in the summer?
Well, that's what Circle C did. And they would start on the river, Snake River and Sandy River, and
And again, I think that had a lot to do with baling, because before baling, it was really hard to transport hay any amount of hay, any distance. And so, you know, they'd step here in this deep snow just because the hay was here. When they got balers and trucks, then it was easier and cheaper to move the hay down where they wanted to have the cattle in the spring anyway, so they could turn them out in the grass down there while there was still snow here. So I think, you know, again, I think it was the technology that happened that allowed the cow-calf guys to kind of move out of here.
Did the smaller ranchers, I mean, every ranch surely didn't have lower elevations to go to.
We did.
Circle C, I mean, they had land all over, Snake River, Salmon River and stuff.
Yeah.
But the smaller operators wouldn't have had that. How
stepped
did
out.
they deal with new technology or the changes?
Well, I think like guys like Darrell, they finally gave up and started running steers. And we'd go out there in the middle of winter, 10 feet of snow.
Summer patch.
Ward Branstad moved all his stuff down below and bought hay and bought grass. You know, turned them out on the, you know, we turned them out down on Cambridge out on those hills. But he went clear to Vale, Oregon and bought hay and fed out the cows and calved the cows and everything down there.
There's a question, I can go look it up, but you old timers probably know. But, you know, when you were feeding all these cattle and you had all those loose stacks of hay, what's the formula for figuring out how many tons of hay you've got in a stack?
There's a measurement.
I know there's a measurement. Do any of you remember it? I can go find it. I know where it is in the book.
I can't remember.
Because you needed to know how many ton of hay you had, because you're going to feed all this hay in the winter. Is anybody curious? It's over and under and around and 5 by 2.
You know, when you say Circle C used their cattle, well, probably Circle C had 2/3 or 3/4 of the cattle in the valley. So when they began to calve down on Salmon River, it was a big impact on the valley. And, you know, and people that were selling them hay out here for their cattle, that when they moved down there, that changed that ratio also.
Was there a time or a transition when people started selling more hay than they used themselves? Or how did the transitions happen from a cow-calf operation where they were calving here if they had to? How did that transition to, I suppose like it is more today with pasture cattle coming in?
I don't know, I've gone full circle.
Oh yeah? You were pastured for a while, now you're back to
We were down on Salmon River and transportation costs to get the cattle and the hay down there started eating it up so much that we sold that, and I'm back up here feeding cows all winter.
just because of the transportation, the price of gas and all that.
And of course, that helps to have a cab tractor too.
Yeah.
Today, though, there's a bunch of pasture that the cattle come in, and that started right after the war, World War II.
Why at that time, do you think?
Well, one of them was old Gus Davis. He brought in several thousand head of cattle in here in the valley, in Lone Valley. They all came in on a train.
Was he somebody that had land here? Who was he?
No, he was just a big old creek. And this creek, he helped a lot of people here in the valley. They sold different ones with pasture his cattle, and instead of trying to run anything themselves, have a few milk cows. That's when we came in here, was right after the war.
What was his name again?
Gus Davis was the main.
So he kind of got things started?
Yeah, he was one of the main ones. My Circle C already had their cattle here. He was the main outsiders, and then there was there's several from Weezer and Indian Valley would drive their steers in here in the spring. And they'd all go out to the railroad.
But they would drive them up here,
They'd drive them up there,
climb up the
right up the highway,
95.
where they could get off. They would
I've trailed cattle up from the lower country, but this was talking about this old Gus Davis. And this was the first cattle truck I'd ever seen. And you couldn't get off the highway. It was all blue roads, and it was going out to Cowboys. It was a white truck. It was a single edge, straight through, and it's going out to a man place for Stevens. So I was taking in these cattle. And my uncle and I went to town for horses. And it was raining like hell. And they jumped the cattle clear off that truck. No unloaded chute. Jumped them out on the highway right there where the state shed is. That was the first thing I ever seen trucks that big. And those cattle were pretty well. You know, I don't know why they did this. It was storming so bad, I guess they could keep up with it. It was just darker. We made it all the way out to 3.5 miles. About 4 miles. That was my first experience with a cattle truck.
About what time frame was that?
Oh,
After the war?
no, it was been during the war.
Oh, yeah.
I was probably 10, 11 years old, maybe, something like that. There wasn't any ranches that had a loading chute. They unloaded chute car.
They just jumped them out of it.
And they went to the golf course, they went to the stop there, so we traveled. This is kind of talking about trailing cattle. And we had our cattle down at Midville, Mark Lewis. And my brother, he had trucks. And I asked him how much it's going to cost to get these home. And he said, well, I forget the figure. I said, I can trail them home a hell of a lot faster and more expensive. Your tickets for diesel. So I took off the 500 gas and then the one part of the trip. We got up about the council and I asked the railroad engineer what the schedule was for the train coming out of the Meadows. It was up one day and comes back the next. Well, it was going back down a bit in the morning. And I asked the engineer, I said, well, that's going to be just about where our cattle are going to be, just south of county. And he said, well, I'll tell you why. And you probably don't realize it, but from town council, you're going uphill until you get to where it comes breaks to the river. If you don't look back, it's steep. But that old boy, the engineer, he had a run at it on the side of the Meadows. And he cut his engine just about the time he got to our cattle. And that was, the cattle was the railroad here and the highway there. And there's 500 head of cattle, and here's this train coming. Well, this is the part I was worried about. But you know, the click of that train, that's all you could hear was just the click, 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 you know. Those steers just stopped. And I think there was all 500 of them look at that thing. And I just knew there was going to be a stampede. And I sure gave that guy a good hand as he went by. That was a one-time deal. So, yeah.
About when was that? Was that a diesel engine or?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, this is pretty modern times. This is,
How many riders did it take to move that many cattle up there?
oh, I think there's 5 of us about
Got them pretty busy. Were they yearling steers?
Yearlings.
Oh my God. I can't imagine.
here. First day out on the trails when you really got your hands full. But if you get them to know one another, get used to it,
Yeah.
then they're pretty decent.
Like yearlings would be pretty flighty, at least at first.
Yeah, when we first, the heel flies came to run out of the pasture, they was a good start. Those heel flies is terrible.
You other older guys?
Daryl talking about this reminds me of oh, I must have been 15 or 16, and I always had a lot of respect for Warren Osborne and thought he was a smart guy. But he went down there to that same country that Daryl's talking about was myself and Galen, oh, what the hell was that?
Galen Lewis.
Huh? Madison. And a kid named Ellis Wallace. And we started through that same country.
I've been quite a crew.
Yeah, with a bunch of yours. Good God, I love that. And anyway, we got through there, but there's what they call the stock trail when you get to where the bridge crosses the Little Weezer River. And you know, and we'd had our wrecks before then, but we got there and there was a damn band of sheep on the stock trail. So Warren said, well, the hell with it, we'll just go up the highway. So we start up the highway, and pretty quick he kicks the cattle off the highway and down on the railroad. And we get up to about Evergreen, and here comes the train. And it didn't stop or anything. It just whistled, and we had cattle scattered for 3 miles. We damn near ran our horses to death, getting those cattle back together. I couldn't believe how it spooked them. They went across the river, up back up on the highway, both ways up and down the railroad track. But like Darryl said, his crew wasn't worth a damn anyway. So he was lucky that we got those cattle all back together and got them up. Finally got them up to Strawberry. And my dad came out and helped us nither and there.
These are yearlings too?
Yeah, they're yearlings, but I guess Warren must have bought them down there the other side of Midvale, some damn place, and we took off across the country with them.
How many did you have?
I forgot, I don't know.
It was a pretty big bunch. So.
Yeah, we had a pretty good little place. I doubt we had 500 like Darryl was talking about. I don't know how many Warren bought down there, but we sure scattered, the train sure scattered them there for a while. I didn't realize how many houses and things were off down there in the pucker brush. I didn't know at that time, this was in the early 50s, there were a lot of houses off down there by Evergreen.
When I was trailing up through there wasn't nothing on
Is that right?
until you got up to Strawberry.
You didn't go on the stock trail either?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, well, we didn't go on the stock trail because the sheep were on it. So we just went up the highway and got on the damn railroad track. I brought cattle out of Jackson Creek a lot of times for the ranch, and we'd always gone up the stock trail, and you know that was fine once you got there and got off the highway. But
Yeah.
But this was going right up. I remember Warren was just crowding off the highway and on the railroad track.
Well, that was a mistake.
And then the train hadn't come along. We
Yeah.
were doing pretty good, and then the train came, and we were a couple hours getting everything back together and going up the country.
Tell us a little bit more about the stock trail and where it was. Did it go all the way up through the country, or was it?
Well, the stock trail that I'm talking about starts right there at where that bridge is on the Little Weezer River, and goes on up to Strawberry.
Highway bridge?
No, yeah, the highway bridge. Instead of going across the bridge, you swing off there and go on the other side of the Little Weezer River.
Turn to the right.
Yeah. And And you just, you know, I don't know, it's probably only, what, 5 miles up through there, right, something like that, I don't know how far it is. Yeah, but from there to Strawberry, you're on what they call the stock trail. I guess it's a dedicated trail.
So is it over like against the foothills? Over
Yeah,
the east side of the?
yeah.
What about
You see-
getting across Middle Fork and all that?
Well,
It's on down to
yeah, yeah.
on the state highway, you get up to Fort Hall Hill, top of Fort Hall Hill, and down in the east fork. Then you're on the driveway.
Is that one across?
Yeah, it's where if you're going to turn off on the Starkey Road on the north end of it, it's right there. Only you don't go across the bridge. You go along the.
Oh, that's the
foothill.
bridge you're talking
Yeah,
about.
yeah.
Oh, I thought you said the little east.
Oh, well, that is a little bit.
No, it's the east one.
That's east fork.
Oh, is it? Okay,
I thought you meant down Indian Valley.
Oh, okay, excuse me. Okay, that's the east fork. I'm sorry,
Yeah, that was the old
Yeah.
road before the highway.
Yeah.
Okay.
Road.
Excuse me, yeah, that's right, it's the east fork.
There's West Fork, East Fork, and West Fork, Big Forks are the least different, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think.
So when you're coming from Midvale, you just have to either get between the highway and the railroad, or the highway, or just wherever you
We'd hit, I think, down to Indian Valley, town, and then we'd be on the road all the way to the top. Midvale. Fort Hall.
Yeah.
Yeah, at the bottom, at the south side of Fort Hall Hill, there was a pasture there that about everybody used to trail cattle, every time we did anyway. And you'd launch off from that pasture early in the morning to come on up to New Meadows with cattle.
I have one other trailer driver, this is way before the one I was talking about. We moved out and wintered our cattle down at Payette, up the river there. And put them out on some spring grass down there. So we took off, I don't know, first of May. Something there was, we had 634 head. And this was a bad mixed bunch trail. We got cows and little calves, we got girls, and there was some 2-year-olds. One husband had some in there, and Virgil Waddell had some cows in there. I had my cows, and I bought some calves. And you mix that bunch together, and they don't trail like. The yearlings take off the lead, and you got the little cows and calves in the back end. That was really a hassle. It took 10 days to get to Mesa. We stayed there at the orchard for 2 days, the rest of it, especially for the calves. And then 2 days on home from there, so it took 12 days from time to start.
What did you do for eating and sleeping? Did you have a wagon or anything, or a truck?
We had a little camper trailer that Klaus and Darlene White used to take out of their logging projects. I thought Klaus had to see if we could borrow that from Margaret and the baby. Well, Darla was a year and a half old. That's what we spent the winter in. Most of it was about January. So when it was all done, then that hooked onto that camper, little trailer house. This old Earl Lindbergh and Margaret, they hooked on the trailer and went around up through the mines, up to Weezer, and get to the Emmett Road up there. Well, we had to make it there in one day.
No, it's only gone
So there was too short. We had one guy that's crippled. And that first day was terrible. We did have 2 goddamn good dogs. nobody's ever made it. Getting up to that frontage road was a struggle. And you know, we didn't lose any cats either. Because Roberto had an exceptional dog. I did too. Wouldn't into them two dogs. That was my first experience with dealing that far away. I was about middle 20s at this. I got a lot of advice from this girl in there.
Is he older than you? How old was he?
He's probably 15. I suppose that there 15 or so. He rode on the mountain up here for about 9 years. Oh, just a very, very good friend of mine. I trust him. I didn't even go ride to see where he was going to go. I mean, if I didn't trust him, I'm damn sure I knew where I was going to go. I knew he'd been all over that country, herding sheep and everything. So he told me where to go, how far, what you were living. So that was my experience. Never forgot. It's very enjoyable. I was glad to him more of that.
How about you, Larry? You got any cattle driving stories?
Yeah, that picture that we got there, by that took it 44, and we'd taken, got all the cattle together and made one drive down Meadows here, down the river.
Which river?
Salmon.
Salmon.
Yeah, and Ravens. See, they own 7 different individual ranches.
Now, what route would you take?
Right down the highway.
Must have been
Yeah, about 5 miles. One old girl, she had a fit because we went, she got stuck in the cattle and her ice cream melted. Another guy, one of the old cows, hopped the tail over on the cart. That's a pretty nasty mess. She gave us a cussing out. I have to be that. You remember the time that the boulder was side of the outfit? Oh, there at right at Rapid River down there, and so we was going around the bend there. There was damn old rooms too. They were ladies that sold out in there. They were sitting there. This old bull, why, he whipped every damn other bull in the bunch. He looked over there, I guess, and seen his reflection on the side of this automobile. Decided he'd take a walk at it. He got, I mean, he hit that and put a big pin in it, all right. I don't know why, but he had a pretty good set on. He did rip it. So that old boy had his wife pushed over against the other side of the car. She couldn't get out. So I got the bull away and buzzed down. I said, that old bull put that dent in your car? And say, man, I heard every cuss word in the dang dictionary. He got through with me, and I took my bull and went on down the road.
Did the bull have weighted horns so you were turning down, or did they stick up?
No, they kind of out. You know, he didn't have, he had pretty sharp horn on it. I don't know why he didn't rip it. But then this one, I was coming up the highway with a bunch, and it was a nice warm day, and so my brother and I, we decided we'd see how many people would offer some drink. So we asked them, some of them why they kind of knew that about it, but it was surprising how many goddamn people had something to drink in the car.
hell do you get your whiskey? Well, we told him. So he says, you better ask every other one. You won't make it. Take
Well, the other part of that story, Larry, when the bull hit the car, was when the man, you told me that when the man got up to Uncle Raleigh, because he asked who the boss was, he told Uncle Raleigh that it wasn't as much, it didn't make him as angry that the car got hit as that damn cowboy back there laughing his head off.
Now we know the rest of the story.
I don't know if you should.
Well, have Larry tell you how he swam one year when he brought the cattle up.
Oh,
you tell her that.
Well, I was with a bunch of cattle, but I didn't see the damn fool. And I think it was in the 50s, and the Little Salmon River was so high, you know, the boulders were running down. You couldn't have ridden a horse across if there hadn't been any water in the damn thing. Raleigh thought that there'd been a steer when we come up before that got on the other side of the river. We got to this bridge and sent Larry up the river, and he went up there a mile or so and didn't find anything. So instead of deciding he was going to go back and go back before he'd come around the bridge, which anybody but a damn fool would have done, he rode his horse into that river. I mean, I thought his horse would have been smarter than that.
This would be Maine salmon.
Yeah, the little salmon right around Pinehurst, right there. It was just higher than hell. Anyway, he got out there, and of course, the first thing that happened is the horse went under and turned over and turned Larry loose, and he can't swim on the lick, and it wouldn't have mattered anyway. I guess he kept us grabbing rocks and why in the hell he ever got out of there alive, I really have no idea. But anyway, I guess Clinton Reeves was getting his rope off his saddle and throwing the rope out there when he got a hold of a rock and finally got out. And the horse got out alive too.
He made it out. Well, I started in once, and I decided I was too far down. So I went up the river a little ways, and that came like first thing that happened, this old horse, he hit a rock. Well, when he reared up, like he tipped over, and that left me there in the middle of the river. And I grabbed them rocks, and pretty quick it shoot me up. Come and shoot me up, and I'd get a breath of air, and back down I'd go. I finally made it across. Then Albert was there. He was the one. And he chewed on my. I still got marks from that.
Did your horse wind up on the same side of the river?
Oh yeah, he come out. So
How old were you at that time?
oh hell, I don't know. I was old enough to know better. But I finally he chewed on me quite a little bit, and I said, you chewed on me long enough. Turn around. No, by God, he says, get in this car and go home and get some dry clothes on. I don't have pneumonia now.
Did you guys ever trail cattle from Snake River over here, or the other way, or did you ever trail them that far? You bet.
Oh, we always trailed from Meadows clear through to Pittsburgh Landing.
What kind of route would you take doing that?
Well, you went down the below Riggins to Race Creek, and then up Race Creek, and then the Forest Service had a road through on top of the ridge. And see, the Maynard Ranch and Pittsburgh Landing, like, they run from river to river, from the Snake to the Salmon. And so we'd get the cattle and go up Race Creek, and we had a holding pen just under the top where we started down the river, and we'd hold them there, and then the next morning, they turn them loose. They knew where they was going, they drove out there. They from then, when we got to Cow Creek, why we split the cattle, one would go on one side of the river, up the hill, and then the Maynard ranch, and Snake River, San Diego, Snake River.
Your wife was telling me there were quite a few times when you rode between here and Pittsburgh, landing all, take you all day, or how far is it up here?
We figured 62 miles,
62?
but they always stated which pasture there. The first night they start from Round Valley and they'd stay over there. And then they would go through to Race Creek, which goes through
Yeah,
town.
go through Reagan's.
Yeah, go through Reagan's.
And then we,
But they had a holding pasture there. And then they started at the top.
How about any questions from the audience? Anything you want to hear?
I guess there's one thing that I think is significant that happened here. You know, I left here in 54 essentially, and I mean, I came back and forth. When I left here in 54, there probably weren't 100 cattle in the valley that weren't white-faced herbers. And now, I'm not sure there's 100 white-faced herbers in the valley. I mean, that to me, the change in the breed of cattle that come in here, it was just astonishing from my perspective to see that happen. The ranch always had a few white faces, but all the cattle that my dad pastured and came out of Weezer when I was a kid here, they were all white-faced herbers, and now they're very few.
What's the major breed now? Is it just kind of a hodgepodge or whatever everybody wants?
Oh, next door. You'll see a lot of blacks. Yeah. The state. There's a lot of black cattle in there. And then black cattle, they were processed, and these cattle come out of California. They've got a lot of ear on them, so there's some rain in there someplace. Black cattle that cut out of ear, and they don't do good cattle.
I was going to ask you guys, you mentioned that what you call a capture pen. There must be some differences in the way you doctor cattle in the old days.
Well, yeah, you shoot them in the butt.
They weren't tame enough to get him in the bar to put him in the chute.
No, I've got pastures where there's no trail or anything. Out in the valley here or out on the mountain. It's a one shot that takes a 22 blank to fire the projectile out there. And when it hits, it detonates another little charge and explodes. And a rubber plunger pushes all over medicine out. This needle is studied in there.
Big Bert was the first one to have one in the valley.
Yeah. I was trialing everything, worked out pretty good.
Yeah,
By golly, they sure would, you know.
I think we were second.
Yeah.
That one summer, when I had a lot of cattle, but I fired that 200 times. And I did not see them when I hit every 10 times. That's a lot.
Did you ever get one where the needle would come out?
Yeah. I had one
The needle kind of had a little dog knot on it.
What?
I called it a dog knot. And it'd hold it in there, you know, long enough to get the medicine in. And sometimes they wouldn't come out too easy.
not if you hit it in the hawk.
Yeah, the tank.
Actually, the hawk was one that just sunk there. I had to rope it and tie it, and most, you know, I couldn't pull it out.
Yeah.
I had to go across.
You know, I was telling Ned about this gun, you know, and how I felt when I was doctoring with it, you know. So you had a couple of sick ones there at home, didn't you? And to prove it, I had to come out and shoot them sick ones. And they got over it, so, and he got one.
Was Was there ever a time in the valley, I don't know how bad pink eye is now, but was it so prevalent back in the old days, you think, Larry or Dick?
Oh,
You still
yeah.
have a lot of pink eye way back then?
Did-
Well, how'd they deal with it back then before?
Well, we broke them, cleaned their eye out, and then I can't remember what we used to put the medicine in the eye. You know, stand capture gun while you're doing a lot of fun when I go or capture gun while you didn't even touch it.
Well, you know, like if animals got pneumonia, and if you're gonna go out there and rope it and chase it all over, it's the worst thing you can do if they got pneumonia. Just capture gun, you just shoot them and they'll put it over this and talk about it. They don't get excited, and it really works great for pneumonia. Especially.
We're gonna have to wrap this up pretty soon, I would assume.
Yeah.
But I have one more question. As far as vaccination and diseases, back, in the 30s or 40s, did they not vaccinate for as much stuff as they do nowadays, I would think? Or
Don't have
did he vaccinate?
They didn't have the medicine that they do nowadays. And, it used to be, we did quite a little bit of foot rot here in the valley. And that was in jungle, because there were two cowboys out there at Love Campbell. He had a big corral out there. And, when I was just a pretty small kid, I'd go over there, and the boys would be, one of them drove bad, and one of them drove the heels, tip them old big 2-year-old steers, big steers, over, and then drag their feet out with the rope, but I don't know what it was. Blue liquor, yeah. And that's the way it is.
KRS and Blue Mitchell, but they got such a much better medicine today than
Oh, yeah.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, as I sit here and I realize that all of you come from a generation of cattlemen, and I wondered what it is what is this passion that you have, and what is the one thing that keeps you interested and focused on what you do? Why do you love it so much?
You're born with it. If you're not born to be a cowman, you'll never make one if you're 40 years old.
Because there doesn't seem to be any newness in the group. I mean, you come from a long line of men.
I'm not that old, how about you?
Well, no, that, you especially, I think, the younger guys.
Yeah, we was on a horse before we learned to walk.
I think part of it too is a feeling of independent. You're on your own. Nobody's telling you what to do. You're figuring it out on your own. You're outside every day. You're fighting the elements, and you have to decide whether or not you can make it or not. Think about everything, on how to make a living with it. But I don't think you'll ever find a cattleman that isn't a very independent person. They're their own men. And they're men, by the way. Strong, smart, hardworking, not afraid. They're good people.
Okay, are we out of time pretty much? It's about almost 9.
Yeah, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I read recently or saw recently an article in the paper about that cattle rustling is on the rise. Have any of you had any experience with that? And is it still a hanging offense?
They lose one occasionally, nothing big time, but when I had cattle out there on the mountain, there was some that I seen that didn't get treated, and some I say too. So, these trailers, horse trailers, gooseneck trailers now, it's a big deal now in Arizona and Texas, open range. They can people field out there, just the dogs, we can load up 6 or 8 heads, and all be gone. Yeah, it's bad there.
Well, if you remember, was moving Ted Smith's cows out to your place to feed them because we couldn't get trucks, and lost 13 head of them somewhere along the way. And Ted swore that somebody had stolen them, you know. Well, they got in, they went through the gate at Idaho Memoirs and nobody's seen it. Yeah. When we finally realized, you know, that that's Ted's cows out there, you know. So we saddled up and went, it was in a whiteout, remember?
Yeah.
Oh, man, snow was blowing and we gathered them up and got them back up where they belong, but they were missing for several days.
Could I answer her question? I don't know, there's, most of us here, or quite a few of us here belong to the Weaver Cattle Association. And what you read in the paper, primarily the problem right now currently is guys in Indian Valley, Cambridge, and some in Midvale, and they run on public land that goes up over toward the Tamarack Ski Hill and over in there. And they have a lot of cattle that will spill over into Long Valley. And it's difficult for those guys to get those cattle gathered up, and they've had cattle rustled out of that country. It's big country over in there. And they have lost cattle. And it's real difficult for the state brand inspectors to get it nailed down too. But it is anyway, in the last couple of years, it's been an increasing problem for them. I don't think us in this valley here have had much trouble because we're not on public range, or not primarily on public range. That'd be about right, guys? But yeah, there is a problem.
We had to fire a rider years ago because they were stealing. What year was that?
Now, Ernie lost a lot of cattle out here this year. I don't know whether it's wolves, like the OX-men, they put rules bad.
Well, you know the way it's set up anymore, these trailers, like put some panels out, set up for 15 minutes, and punch into them and be gone. A little while.
I was talking to Dave Wilson a couple of years ago, and he was out 22 calves, and he figured wolves.
Where was he running cattle?
He runs up around Rainbow Lake, back up in that country. Yeah. And in our front yard.
Yeah, I think we talked to him, we were up there a couple of summers ago, and they said a lot of those calves have been taken by wolves.
No, they didn't know. You know, that's what I can't figure out, why we had it pretty well cleaned out there for years, and then they had to reinstate them. Now they're worse than they ever was.
They got them delisted now.
Yeah. You can start it. Now you can start it.
I was going to ask you, Dean, how many cattle are on like forest land, DL land around here?
I think Daryl would know probably better how many are running out, because your daughter runs out.
Well, this allotment is 22,000 acres, and over here is 32,000. This is actually all Forest Service here. You know, right, Jeff? Yeah. Now over here, there's DLN State and Forest Cascade, Forest Service.
How many head do you think are out there, Daryl?
They run out there?
Yeah.
I put 1,000 head out there.
Out that country?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
The way he said down there at that meeting, he was talking about Long Valley, Adams County, Washington County, there have been 101 head reported missing last year. Figured that had been stolen.
I know one family down there, they come off their allotment with 65 head missing.
How many head of cattle would you estimate is pasture in our valley of summer?
Oh, I think about 14,000. I think they lived around this way. It's more than what Victor and had signed 10,000 head.
Are they mostly from outside of the valley?
Yeah, they were.
Would you know that when they, how many cattle are gonna get shipped out in the fall?
I really don't. I know it's down from what it used to be because of the subdivisions and stuff. The numbers are down. Alvin probably spends half the time that he used to, but it's not so much the industry as the buildup. What used to be grazable, a lot of circle Cs. Now that are or something. Timber pines.
Should we wrap this up, I guess?
Thanks to all of our participants, and thank you for coming to enjoy this evening. Watch for our next posters because we'll be back again. Thank you.